Welcome to Godly Play at Clayton Valley Presbyterian Church. I'm Kathleen, and I'm glad you're here to share the story today. When we come to Godly Play, we're usually leaving the sanctuary, and teachers greet each child at the door individually, and we come to the circle one by one to find our place as we are called by name. No matter which teacher is teaching that Sunday, whoever's telling the story, we always greet one another the same way when we come to the circle. The Lord be with you. Next, of course, we need to find out where we are in the great circle of the church year. So we go to the calendar and move our arrow on our calendar to the next Sunday in the season, this season being the ordinary time. We see that we're starting to run low on our ordinary Sundays before our season will change. But that's where we know where we are, the great green and growing Sundays. We come back to the circle and get ready for the story. We make our bodies still, we make our hands still, we make our mouths still, so that we're able to come close to what's in the story for us today. Even if we've heard it before, the last time we heard the story, we were different than we are today. Every box and tray, every basket in this room is a story. And so it's important to look where the teacher goes to pick the story from the shelf so we know where to find it. Watch where I go today, over to the sacred stories from the Hebrew Scriptures. This basket has 2 more baskets inside for the things that we'll need to tell our story. This story is a desert story. So many important and wonderful things happen in the desert that we need part of it in our room to tell those stories. We can't get the whole desert, of course, so we just have a piece of it in the desert box. It's heavy. It's on rollers. And if you were here at the circle with me, you'd probably help me lift it up over the rug to bring it. The desert is a strange and dangerous place. The winds blow the sand so that it changes shape. It's easy to get lost in the desert. During the day, the sun burns hot. People have to wear protective clothing so that they don't burn. But at night, after the sun goes down, it can be very cold. There's almost no water in the desert. And all creatures need water to live. Hardly anything grows, so it's hard to find things to eat in the desert. No one goes into the desert unless they have to. Now, after the flood, all the creatures and all the people spread out in the 4 directions to fill the world with life again. Many people began to settle along the rivers. They formed villages and towns along the rivers. Many people began to settle in the great city of Ur. Now in Ur, there were gods for everything. There were gods for the trees, and gods for the rocks, gods for the clouds, gods for everything. But there was one family who believed that all of God was everywhere, all the time. Abram and Sarai were part of that family. They didn't know that that's what they believed, but they did. And so when it came time for them to move to a new place, they weren't sure that they would find God there. They left with everything they had, their sheep, their donkeys, even the old people and all the children, and they followed the great river to find their way. It took a long time to go there. They would sleep in their tents at night, prepare their meals. And finally they began to see people coming out of Haran. And so they knew that they were getting close. And finally, they reached their destination. They were very happy in Haran. Abram would sometimes go out in the evening and look at the stars. Abram came so close to God, and God came so close to Abram that he knew what God wanted him to do. God told Abram that he would go to a new place, a new land called Canaan. Abram told Sarai, and once again, they set out with their animals and their family members and their helpers. But this time they did not have the river to guide them. They were going out to the west in the desert. Hoping they would find God there as they had in Haran. They stopped first at a place called Shechem. And they were surprised, they were happy, because they found God was with them there in Shechem. And so one of the things they did was to build an altar. To give thanks. And to remind other people that God was there. They continued on to the west. It's slow and it's hard across the desert, carrying their water and their food. Then when they came to Bethel, they found that God was there too. And so again, they built an altar to give thanks for God guiding them and to remind others that God guides us. On they went. And finally they reached Hebron. And they settled near the oaks of Mamre. They were home. One night, God called Abram out into the desert again. God came close to Abram. He said that he would make him the father of many, and Abram could not believe this, for he and Sarai were very full of years. But God said that it would be so. I will bless you, and you will be a blessing. Abram went back. He told Sarai that God had given him this message and that they were to change their names. Abram would become Abraham, the father of many, and Sarai would be Sarah, the mother of many. Sarah had a hard time believing this. But a few days later, 3 strangers came out of the desert. And as was the custom, they welcomed them in, Abraham and Sarah. They gave them meat and milk, bread. And the strangers told Abraham that he would have a son. Sarah, who was preparing the food, heard this, and she couldn't help it. She laughed. She still couldn't believe, so full of years they were, that they could have the child that they had always wanted. The strangers went on. And not too long after that, Abraham and Sarah discovered that in fact there was a baby coming. And when their son was born, they gave him the name, in their language, of laughter. They named him Isaac. But Sarah was full of years. And while he was still a growing boy, she died. And Abraham took her to be buried in a cave under the great oak trees in Mamre. Isaac grew, became a man, and of course Abraham was very old at this time, but he had one more thing to do. And so he asked his servant to return to their home and to find a wife for his son. And so the son went back. It all looked familiar again. He remembered. And as he got close, he saw a young woman getting water from the well. And as he approached her, she saw as he was coming out of the desert, she didn't recognize him, but she offered him and his animal water. They must be thirsty. He spoke to her. Her name was Rebecca. And he told her who he was and why he was there. And she invited him to her home. He must be hungry. So Abraham's servant went home with Rebecca and had a meal with her family. And he told them all about the great family that was promised to Abraham and Sarah, and who they were, and how they were close to God. And that they had a wonderful son, Isaac. Rebecca decided there and then that she wanted to return with the servant. And so she set out with him. And they crossed the desert together, going back. As they got close, Isaac could see them coming out of the desert, and he ran to meet her. He greeted Rebecca, for he knew that they were part of this great family that God had promised his father. And of course, you know what happened. They married. And Abraham's work was done. And he too was buried in a cave next to Sarah under the great oak. Isaac and Rebecca had children, and their children had children, and their children had children, until your grandparents had your parents, and your parents had you, and now you are part of that great family. A family that is as great as all the stars in the sky, that it is great as all the grains of sand in the desert. Now, I wonder what part of this big story that you like the best. I wonder if there's a part about this story that you think is the most important for us to remember and to wonder about. I wonder where you might be in this story. If you have gone out and looked at the stars and felt close to God and felt God come close to you, I wonder if you have laughed, believing something could not happen. I wonder if there's something that we could leave out but still have all of the story that we need. I wonder what you wonder about. In this room, after we hear the story, we have our work time so that we can continue the wondering. Some of you like to work with the story, and it's when you tell the story for yourself that it becomes yours. Once you've heard a story in this room, it's yours forever, and you can take it down anytime you'd like to work with it. I know lots of you like to work with the desert especially. But some of you like to take the art materials, the craft materials, and make some part of the story your own. So however you tell this story for yourself today, I hope you'll spend some time with it. We put our work away. Sometimes we're not finished. We have to put it in the drawer with our name on it so that we can finish it the next time. We get our table cleaned up and our hands cleaned up. And then it's time to serve the feast. We serve one another. We take turns doing that. But before we have the feast, we always start the same way. We always start here at the circle with prayer. And we use the holding cross because it's nice. It feels good in your hand and kind of helps you focus on that prayer that might not even have any words or words that only God hears. Some people like to pray out loud, but you don't have to. We take turns and we're very still so that each person has a time to pray, however they say their own prayer. And then, when the prayer cross comes back to the storyteller, together we all say the prayer that Jesus taught us and still this very day teaches us. Our Father who's in heaven, holy is your name. And then it's time for us to share the feast, which is how we remember the meal that Jesus had with his friends in the upper room. When they'd all eaten, and they'd had enough to eat and drink, Jesus took the bread. We use matzah, of course, because we remember how important matzah was when the people went into the desert. Jesus took the bread then and he broke it after he had blessed it, and he asked them to eat all of it and to remember him. It was right there. They didn't understand what he meant until later. And we try to understand even today. Then he took the cup and he blessed that too, and he asked them to drink all of it. For it was his promise that if we would come together here in his name, he would be with us, even to the end of the age. Even now. So wherever you are, I hope you have a little bread and a cup, and that you can share that now as we are together in spirit until we can be together here again when it's safe. And until we come together again, may the Lord bless you and keep you always.